Wow, I never knew that pattern work could be so much fun. Hey, student pilot, what are you doing? Oh, hi, Mr. Flight Instructor, sir. I was just working on my pattern work like you asked me to. That's not what I meant by pattern work. Pattern work is when you take off and land at the same airport while staying in the airport traffic pattern. Let me break it down for you.
Pattern work is perhaps one of the most underrated, yet among the most important aspects of your flight training.
Flying in the pattern may seem boring, repetitious, and monotonous, especially when you would rather be flying to another destination.
But practicing your pattern work regularly is among the best ways to hone your skills as an aviator.
Flying in a traffic pattern means that you take off from an airport, you fly around the airport such that you set yourself up to land on the same runway that you took off from. This is called flying the pattern. So why do we practice takeoffs and landings in the pattern, otherwise known as pattern work? Well, the primary reason is to be able to quickly set yourself up to repeatedly practice your takeoffs and landings with minimal delay in between. There were other benefits to pattern work as well. Gaining familiarity with the airport traffic pattern, learning to navigate the traffic pattern while there were other aircraft in the pattern with you or on the ground, also getting ready to take off or land, and also learning to communicate with other aircraft or with the control tower. Hey, why don't we go for a ride around the traffic pattern on one of my recent flights? There are 15 steps to flying in the traffic pattern. The first step is obviously to start the engine.
At this point, you should have already completed both your exterior as well as your interior pre-flight inspections.
Step 2 is to taxi from the ramp to the run-up area.
At this point, you should have completed your radio checks, tested your brakes, verified your altimeter, heading indicator, and your attitude indicator.
Step 3 is to conduct the run-up test. This is where you test the aircraft controls, the engine, make sure that everything is running smoothly. This is your last chance to make a go, no-go decision about taking off.
The run-up test is where you test your aircraft's flight controls, your aircraft's engine, your aircraft's instrumentation, and get your aircraft ready for takeoff.
This is an extremely critical checklist, which you should never rush through or ever consider taking shortcuts with.
Click the link in the description below for a free download of all of the checklists referenced in this video. Now, when you're flying in the traffic pattern, it's inevitable that you're going to be sharing the airspace and the airport environment with other aircraft. As you can see here, another aircraft was getting ready to land while I was holding short of the active runway.
Traffic on short final generally has the right of way over traffic waiting to take off. You must stay behind the yellow line and wait for the landing traffic to touch down and clear the runway before you can proceed to taxi onto it. This is called holding short.
Step 4 is to taxi into position and hold, followed by the takeoff roll.
Taxiing into position and hold is where you line the aircraft up with the runway centerline in preparation for takeoff. Now would be a good time to set the heading indicator to the runway heading.
Now it's time to apply full throttle to begin the takeoff roll.
During this takeoff roll, you will check if airspeed is alive and engine is in the green.
Step 5. Once you've reached the rotation speed, this is where you pull back on the yoke and rotate for takeoff. Step 6. Once you have taken off, you are now flying what is called the upwind portion of the traffic pattern. Step 7. Once your aircraft has reached sufficient altitude, it's time to turn your aircraft either 90 degrees to the left or to the right. That's counterclockwise or clockwise around the traffic pattern. Which direction you travel depends on what is the established traffic pattern direction at your airport. This can be found in the airport facilities directory. Step 8. Now that you're established on the crosswind, it's time to turn either left or right, depending on whether you're flying left traffic or right traffic, onto the downwind leg of the airport traffic pattern. This is again 90 degrees either to the left or to the right. And once you're established on the downwind, you're actually flying parallel to the runway.
Once you are established on downwind, you will be at the traffic pattern altitude, which is typically 1,000 feet above ground level at most airports. And you should be at your cruise airspeed, flying parallel to the runway.
Flying the aircraft along the airport traffic pattern can be quite a challenge. If you're finding the content of this video to be helpful, be sure to hit the like button. And be sure to subscribe to our channel, as we will be producing more content for aspiring aviation enthusiasts like you. Step 9. As you are flying downwind parallel to the runway, you're going to reach a certain point where the aircraft is abeam the end of the runway, the far end of the runway, the end of the runway that you actually want to land onto. This is called being abeam the runway. That basically means that you are flying parallel to the edge of the far end of the runway that you want to land on. Once you're abeam the runway, it is time to execute your landing checklist and configure the aircraft for landing.
The before landing checklist items typically consist of the following. Set mixture to full rich. Turn fuel pump on, if there is one in your aircraft. Turn carburetor heat on. Switch to the fuller fuel tank, if applicable. Reduce throttle to descent, typically 1700 to 1800 RPMs in a single-engine Piper or Cessna. Set flaps to 10 degrees. Turn landing lights on, as required. Pitch for the approach airspeed, typically 80 to 90 knots. Brief the approach.
At this point, your aircraft should now be in the first stage of the landing configuration, slowing down and descending for the approach.
Step 10. Now that you're established on the downwind in the landing configuration, it's time to turn onto the base leg of the traffic pattern. This basically involves turning 90 degrees to the left or to the right, either the right or the left traffic pattern, depending on the traffic pattern at your airport, and descending further until you get to the altitude from which you're going to begin your final descent onto the runway. Once you're established on the base leg of your traffic pattern, you are essentially perpendicular to the runway that you're going to be landing on.
When turning from downwind to base, you should extend the second notch of flaps, which is typically 25 degrees. You should reduce your airspeed to anywhere from 70 to 80 knots. You should strive to maintain the same 1700 to 1800 RPM setting. Here is where you would pitch to maintain airspeed and adjust power to control altitude, or rate of descent. Your descent rate should be anywhere from 300 to 500 feet per minute, depending on how tightly you fly the pattern. By the time you are on the extended runway centerline, you should typically be about 500 to 600 feet AGL.
All right, step 11. Here's where you get ready for landing. You're going to turn from base onto final approach. Basically, you're going to be turning 90 degrees either to the left or to the left or the right traffic pattern, and establishing yourself onto the glide path to the runway. All right, step 12. You're on final approach. You are no more than half a mile to a mile away from the end of the runway. You're setting yourself for landing. This is called being on short final.
As you set yourself up on final approach, you should fully extend the flaps to 40 degrees. Pitch to maintain a steady 65 to 70 knots. And get ready to bring the power to idle once you have established that you are within gliding distance of the runway.
Step 13. Now that you are directly over the runway, it's time to establish your flare. This is where you transition into the landing attitude from which you are going to actually touch down onto the runway. All right, step 14. You've successfully touched down onto the runway, and now you're in the landing roll.
Once you've touched down onto the runway, you will need to keep the airplane steady and gently apply the brakes as it bleeds off airspeed. At this point, you should retract the flaps, use full elevator back pressure, set the trim to neutral, turn carb heat off, lean the mixture, and turn the fuel pump off.
Oh, and one more very important thing. Do not ride the brakes. Let the airplane slow down under its own momentum and only apply the brakes gently as needed until it comes to a full stop.
And now for the final step. You've exited the runway. You've cleared the active runway, and now you're heading to the ramp to park your airplane. Congratulations, we've completed a traffic pattern.
Once you park the airplane, you will need to execute the shutdown checklist, which consists of items such as shutting down the radios, transponder and navigation equipment, reducing the throttle to idle, weaning the mixture to idle cutoff, turning off the magnetos, turning off the master switch, and finally setting the parking brake.